lot of grapplers are grinding in the gym and on the mat, but they're not actually getting stronger. They're just getting tired, burnt out, or worse, injured. In this episode, I break down 6 scientific principles that every single grappling athlete needs in their strength program. These are principles that are going to allow you to make long-lasting progress, faster gains, and massively help you enhance your athleticism as a grappler. You're going to want to listen to this entire podcast because I break down how to implement each principle into your training program so you can build real grappling athleticism that shows up on the mats. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. I'm feeling good today. I'm feeling fired up, excited to be hanging with you guys this morning. What we're going to be talking about in today's episode are the 6 scientific principles of strength training and how important those things are to be part of your strength program. If your strength program as a grappler does not have these 6 things, it's a terrible strength program. I'm just going to say it. And it's going to prevent you from being able to make long-term progress. It's going to prevent you from being able to feel and perform your best. And it's really going to hold you back in your ability to develop elite grappling athleticism. But before we dive into what those 6 principles are, I do need to give a huge shout out. These 6 principles, I first learned about these from some OGs in the game. Chad Wesley Smith, Dr. Mike Isertel, and I think Dr. James Hoffman. Many of you guys know who Dr. Mike Isertel is from Renaissance Periodization. He's put out a ton of great stuff on hypertrophy training, strength training, even has some videos out there for specifically for grappling athletes. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he's been in the industry a long time. And I first heard about him through this book called Scientific Principles of Strength Training that was co-authored by elite powerlifter and also I think he's a purple belt now, but Chad Wesley Smith. He's worked with grappling athletes for years. And then there's this other guy who co-wrote the book, James Hoffman. Their book, Scientific Principles of Strength Training, is fantastic. Really, all of these principles came from them. I can't take credit for any of these, but the main goal for this podcast is to talk about how these principles can be integrated into your own strength program. It's important that you guys eventually take back control over your training. I don't want you guys to be following some crap cookie cutter training program that doesn't take into account these 6 training principles. And as a coach, I can often see some major issues when athletes come to me and they show me their workouts. I can quickly see what the issues are if I can't find these 6 principles. So let's go ahead and start with going over what those principles are. We'll break down each principle in and of itself, and then we'll talk about some strategies you can use to implement these principles into your workouts. So that way, not only can your workouts be more efficient, but you can make better progress. You can become brutally strong, pack on slabs of muscle, enhance your conditioning, and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's start with principle number 1. That's going to be specificity. Specificity, really, the main idea behind it is you need to train specific to the physical demands of your sport, or you need to train in a way that's going to help you be better prepared for what you're actually going to come up against in your sport. And this is probably the biggest mistake that I see grappling athletes make, or one of the biggest mistakes that I see grappling athletes make, and is that they're not training specifically to become a better grappler. Their workout program may be fantastic. It may have like all the best exercises and the best tempo and rest periods and the latest science on hypertrophy and all that stuff. It's just not specific to jiu-jitsu, or it's just not specific to wrestling. And if your workouts or if the training that you're doing in the gym isn't specific to what you're going to encounter or experience on the mat, it's a bad training program. And there is a balance to be had with specificity. On one hand, you want to be specific enough to the physical demands of jiu-jitsu, but you don't want to take specificity so far that you do like only Turkish get-ups and weighted hip escapes, which are I would go as far to say that those are pointless exercises if your goal is to build real, brutal grappling strength. Just because the Turkish get-up looks like a technical stand-up does not mean that's going to be a great exercise for making you brutally strong as a grappler. It can be a great warm-up exercise. It can be a great circus lift to kind of like show off some weird feats of strength, which I'm all about. I think that stuff is fun. But when it comes down to training specifically for the physical demands of grappling, it looks like something you would do in grappling, but it's just not going to help you get strong in the way that you would need to in order to perform well on the mat. Specificity can, mean a bunch of different things. Specificity can mean that you're going to train specifically for the type of stress that you're going to encounter on the mat. So like if your elbows are always getting banged up at jiu-jitsu, incorporating some specificity into your training program to strengthen the tissues of your elbows is probably a good idea. Same thing with your neck. Your neck is going to get banged up a ton in jiu-jitsu. So integrating specificity into your training by adding different types of neck exercises, upper back trap exercises is part of training with specificity for the physical demands of your sport. Now, there's other demands and other athletic qualities that you need to perform well, not just be durable enough to train jiu-jitsu and to compete in jiu-jitsu or wrestling, but different athletic qualities that if you have more of those things, it's going to help you perform a lot better, such as isometric and concentric strength. So isometric strength, easy way to think about it is just holding a static position against resistance. When you're on someone's back, you have a seatbelt and a body triangle. Maintaining that position, you're incorporating a lot of isometric strength. Concentric strength is like moving stuff, So like when you're contracting your muscles, so if you're doing a bicep curl and you curl the weight up, the strength that you have to curl and contract your bicep, that would be concentric strength. As you improve in isometric and concentric strength, you have a greater capacity to perform well as a grappler. You think about all the different techniques that you do at jiu-jitsu and all the different scrambles and exchanges that you get into. If you have a greater amount of concentric strength, which really comes down to your ability to produce force, that's only going to make all of the techniques that you already have even more dangerous and more effective. Now, I've talked about it a couple podcasts ago, and it's worth bringing up now, is that there's this misconception by a lot of old grapplers that don't lift. Ironically, none of the newer, younger grapplers think this way, which I think is kind of funny. But there's like this old myth that, getting strong for jiu-jitsu is going to ruin your technique. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Getting stronger has no correlation to, quote unquote, ruining or degrading your technique. It's only going to enhance whatever quality of technique you already possess. So if you're a white belt and you do a really crappy looking triangle or a really crappy looking armbar, getting stronger isn't going to make that your armbar better or worse. It's just going to allow you to apply more force with the technique that you already have. However, if you do have pretty good armbar finishing mechanics, if you do have a great triangle choke, getting stronger is only going to make that even more dangerous and even more effective. And that's where concentric strength is a really important physical quality to have as a grappler. Now, the other thing that's important to look at is isometric strength. So basically your ability to hold a position against resistance. This is a lot more obvious in jiu-jitsu and really any grappling sport because of just the nature of grappling. You're fighting for position. Once you get to a position, you don't want to give up that position. So you're often like holding strong or holding certain frames. The more that you can use your isometric strength, again, it's not going to make your technique worse. It's not going to make your technique, quote unquote, better. It's just going to enhance whatever quality of technique you already possess. Now, when it comes to training with specificity, we do want to have our workouts be specific to the physical demands that we encounter as grapplers, but we also want to have some, I almost think of it, and it's kind of an oxymoron, this idea of general specificity. It's a good idea to build general strength. It's a good idea to build general explosiveness and power, general conditioning. However, we don't want to go so far on the general side of things that we get far away from what is actually going to be required of us as grapplers on the mat. And then we also don't want to lean so hard into specificity that we miss out on some of the general benefits or the general strength, general conditioning, and things like that. On either end of the spectrum, general would be like only doing CrossFit workouts. I think CrossFit's great. I don't think it's the greatest workout program ever. I think there's a lot of benefits. I also think that CrossFit presents a lot of issues, especially if you don't have a good coach. But where CrossFit starts to fail for grapplers is that if you're a grappling athlete and you just go to your local CrossFit box and do the workout of the day, That's great for building general work capacity, general conditioning, general strength. However, those workouts are pretty far away from the specific physical demands and the specific athletic abilities you need as a grappler. So there does need to be a good balance where you're not so specific to where you're only doing Turkish get-ups and weighted hip escapes, but you also don't want to go so general on the other end where you're only doing CrossFit workouts or you're training like a bodybuilder and it has nothing to do with specificity for jiu-jitsu or for wrestling. That is the first main principle. Your training program, your workout plan, whatever you're doing, whether you're following one of my training programs, whether you're building your own training program, it needs to be specific to the physical demands that you're going to encounter as a grappling athlete, or at the very least, just specific to whatever your training goals are. If your goal is to get as strong as possible, your training program should not consist of running for 2 hours every single day. That's not specific to the training goal. If your goal is to prep for a jiu-jitsu competition, your workouts should not consist of only doing squat, bench, deadlift for 1 rep maxes like you're going to step on a powerlifting platform. That is not specific enough for the training goal. It's not specific enough to the physical demands of a grappling athlete. Now, the second principle that we're going to bring up is a principle of overload. You can almost think of overload as progression. There's a term out there, progressive overload, which basically means that you're progressively or every so often going to make the training a little bit more difficult in some way. And the reason why we need to do this is to continue to drive adaptation. We need to continue to drive change, drive progress. If you do what you've always done, you're going to stay the same pretty much. And if you always do the exact same workout with the exact same weight, with the exact same, like all the conditions are the same, you're going to run into something called accommodation, which basically means that your body adapts to the stimulus that you're providing for it. And then it just stops making progress because it has nothing else to challenge it or to stimulate it to make greater progress. So overload needs to be baked in to your training program. You can't really have a successful training program without overload. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can progressively overload your training or progressively make your training more and more difficult week after week. Now, the easiest way to identify this is just by adding weight on the bar or weight to whatever exercise you're doing. If you're doing, let's see, this morning for my max effort workout, I did overhead press. So if you do 95 pounds on overhead press this week, to overload it next week, your goal could be to do 100 pounds. The week after that, your goal would be to do 105 pounds. So you're just overloading that exercise by adding weight every week. Now, the other way that you can introduce overload is to add reps. So you can keep the exact same weight of 95 pounds. Say in week 1, you did it for 3 reps. Week 2, you do it for 4 reps. Week 3, you do it for 5 reps. That's another way that you can overload training. You could also do a combination of adding weight and adding reps. You can keep the weight and the number of reps per set the same and do more sets, adding sets per workout. So maybe for some of your accessory work, you do 3 sets of 10 in week 1. In week 2, you do 4 sets of 10. Or in week 3, you do 5 sets of 10. You can also overload training by playing around with the rest periods between sets. So maybe your goal is to do 3 sets of 5 for a given exercise. The weight stays the same, the number of reps stay the same, and the total number of sets stay the same. That never changes over the course of 3 weeks. However, you progressively make it harder or you progressively overload the training stimulus by decreasing the rest periods between those sets. So maybe in week 1, you rest 2 minutes between sets. Then in week 2, you bring that rest period down to 1.5 minutes. Then in week 3, you really push yourself and challenge yourself, again, keeping everything else the same, and you only rest 1 minute between sets. The next way that you can progressively overload training is to increase time under tension. So you can keep the exact same weight the same. You can keep the exact same number of sets per workout the same number of reps per set the same, but maybe in week 1, you do a 2-second count on the way down for something like dumbbell bench press. In week 2, you're going to push yourself and overload the training stimulus is a little bit more. So instead of going 2 seconds down, you do 4 seconds down. Then in week 3, again, everything else stays the same, but you do 6 seconds down. There's other ways that you can overload training by making the training a little bit more complicated or adding a little bit more complexity to it. So maybe in week 1, you do a box squat. Box squats are a fantastic exercise. I love box squats. They're awesome. But then in week 2, you're still going to use the same squat movement pattern, but maybe you take out the box. So you're overloading that movement pattern by taking out some of that stability, making it a little bit more complex. Maybe in week 3, you add some accommodating resistance, or you do something else to kind of make it a little bit more challenging. You do a squat with a specialty bar. You can overload movement patterns to make them a little bit more complex. And a good training program will have very clear progressive overload from week to week. If you look at a training program and say a training program is 12 weeks long and you can't really see where the overload is, I would argue that training program probably isn't very well designed. There should be very clear parameters on, okay, like in week 1, this is what we're doing. In week 2, we're building off of that. In week 3, we're then building on it some more. And then I did forget to mention one other way you can overload. You can also overload by gradually increasing the rate of perceived exertion or how close you're getting to absolute failure. So in week 1, maybe you work up to 7 to 8 RPE on a given exercise, or 7 to 8 out of 10 intensity. In week 2, maybe you bump that up to 8 to 9 out of 10 intensity. And then in week 3, you really push it. You go like, I'm going 9 to 10 out of 10 intensity. I'm gangstering out as much as possible in week 3. That's another way you can overload your training. And then you can also kind of take it proximity to failure. So maybe I like to do this for a lot of calisthenic exercises and different body weight exercises. So in week 1, I might have an athlete do 3 sets of pull-ups, 3 sets of dips, and I'll tell them, hey, on each set, I want you to leave 2 reps in the tank. So just go off a feel for this first week. Do your set, do as many clean, technically perfect reps as you can, but for every set on pull-ups and dips, stop 2 reps away from absolute failure. Then in week 2, I say, okay, I want you to do the same exercises, pull-ups, dips. You're going to do 3 sets each. However, I want you to go all the way up to where you only have 1 rep left in the tank on each set. Then in week 3, I might tell them, hey, this is going to be the tough week. This is where we're gangstering out. This is where we're really pushing it. Pull-ups, dips, still 3 sets for both of those exercises, but I want you to take every set to muscular failure. That's a pretty tough workout right there. So those are all the different ways that you can overload your training. And I'll talk about a little bit later how you can kind of plug in those different methods of overloading the training stimulus, how you can kind of pull on those different levers depending on what kind of stimulus you want to create for your athlete or for yourself. But if you're training with specificity, that's the first step. You got to train like a grappling athlete. The next step is you have to introduce some form of overload from week to week, or training. A training week doesn't have to fit all within a 7-day week. Sometimes you can have a quote unquote 10-day training week. However long your training week is, from week to week, it needs to get progressively harder. You need to progressively increase the training stimulus, which then kind of brings us to principle number 3, which is fatigue management. If you're going to be making training harder and harder and harder, you're going to introduce more and more fatigue. So you need to have things built into the training program, or if you're following someone else's training program, there needs to be things built in there that allow you to better manage fatigue. Because if you don't have this, you're really just going to run yourself into the ground. In my Strength Matrix training app, during during a Q&A? I think someone just left a comment on one of the workouts. They said, hey, Coach Jay, I train 2 hours in the morning at Jiu-Jitsu and 3 hours at night, Monday through Friday. I do 1 open mat on Saturday, and Sunday's a complete rest day. I sleep 5 to 6 hours a night. What do you think? And so I just was completely honest and I messaged him back and I said, like, look, dog, I think you have a one-way ticket to running yourself into the ground. It's very clear that you're passionate. It's very clear that you're really fired up about getting tons of training in on the mat, which, like, I commend you. I think that's freaking dope. However, you're building up all of this fatigue, and there's not many strategies built into that training week that you just showed me that's given you enough time to properly recover and manage that fatigue. Remember, it's not about what you do in the gym or on the mat that leads to progress. It's about what you do and can still recover from. Your training sessions in the gym, and to some extent your training sessions on the mat, should be designed to stimulate positive gains and positive progress, not annihilate your body so bad that you can't get a good training session the next day. So fatigue management, that principle, is so important because the fancy stuff, the sexy stuff, is specificity and overload. The thing that needs to be like get more credit is fatigue management. And there are a lot of different ways that you can manage fatigue. You can manage fatigue throughout the training program by making sure that your workouts are separated by about 48 to 72 hours. It doesn't just have to be your workouts. It can really just be the hardest, highest stimulus training sessions need to be separated by about 48 to 72 hours. The main reason for this is because you can't go balls to the wall. You can't go hard in the paint every single day and maintain that across an entire week. Even if you're young, even if you're, on a bunch of special supplements, like that might work for a little bit, but you're going to run out of juice. You're going to run out of road to keep burning the rubber like that. And so it's important that you have your high stimulus training sessions. You know what those are. If you're following on my training app, you're working with a coach who sends it to you in a spreadsheet, you have those workouts. Then when you look at your training week, you need to see, okay, I'm going to do day one of this workout plan on Monday. I need to make sure that I have enough time to recover from day one's workout before I do day two's workout. So maybe you put day one on Monday, and then you take a little bit of rest. Maybe it doesn't have to be a complete rest day, but a lower stimulus training day on Tuesday because you're trying to recover from the workout you did the day before. Then on Wednesday, that's when you go back to the gym to hit that high stimulus workout again. Then you can't just roll right into day three. You need to give yourself time to recover from day two, and maybe you're still recovering a little bit from day one. So you wait 48 to 72 hours, then you do day three. Another way you can kind of bake in fatigue management into your training program, or a good training program will have this kind of baked in, is using what is called reps in reserve, or rate of perceived exertion. I'm a big fan of using rate of perceived exertion, especially for grappling athletes. And really what that is that is an internal gauge of intensity. So 10 out of 10 RPE would be like an all-out, gut-busting, eyeball-popping, chony sharding, hardest max set you've ever done on anything. So it could be like a 5-rep max, a 3-rep max, a 1-rep max. 10 out of 10 RPE could also be like just the nastiest and gutsiest conditioning workout you've ever done, or the hardest sparring session you've ever done in your entire life. Still to this day, I remember what my hardest sparring session was at Jiu-Jitsu. It was nasty. I was training in it was a Saturday morning gi class, and our coach Cassio, he didn't put a timer on. He's like, just grab a partner, start rolling. We're like, whew, okay. And we just rolled and rolled and rolled until he said stop, and then he would have us switch partners. And so in this class, at the time I was a blue belt, and in this class there was a guy named Sean who was a blue belt, and then there's also a black belt named Sean. Sean wrestled, and he was pretty good. I haven't seen him in a few years, so I don't know if he's still training jiu-jitsu. I hope he is, but Sean was like at the time, the toughest role in the gym for me. And blue belt Sean. Black belt Sean wasn't that tough because I couldn't do anything. I would just get completely smoked and I couldn't move. So like I physically couldn't do much. So it physically wasn't that taxing to roll with black belt Sean because I just kept getting like mounted and strangled all the time. And so Cassio, he said, okay, like break, grab a new partner. And he said, Josh, go with Sean. And I was like, I really hope he's, and I was already pretty tired. And he said, go with Sean. So I look over at black belt Sean and I start walking towards him. He's like, no, Sean. And he goes and points at blue belt Sean. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I don't know how long that round was. I think it was like 20, 25 minutes. And that was still to this day the hardest sparring round I've ever done in my entire life. And so that kind of set the bar for me of like, okay, that is a 10 out of 10 RPE jiu-jitsu sparring round. If I meet that level in any other sparring rounds today, I know that that's like that as high as it goes for me. When it comes to stuff in the gym, RPE oftentimes is pretty easy to figure out or kind of gauge based on what your maxes are. So like the heaviest floor press you've ever done, the heaviest box squat you've ever done, that would be like 10 out of 10 RPE. And so kind of to circle back to fatigue management, if you kind of have those pinpoints or those like drop pins, if you will, like on a map, you can kind of gauge, okay, how close am I getting to that all out highest intensity? And you can manage fatigue by kind of getting closer and then backing off from 10 out of 10 RPE throughout your training. So for myself, when I coach a lot of grapplers that I'm working with, I'll have them do max effort work where it's like, hey, I want you to work up to a 5 rep max on low handle trap bar deadlift. However, I want you to do it at 8 RPE. So 8 out of 10 RPE. And the way we kind of manage fatigue is that it needs to feel like an 8 out of 10 intensity for that day. I work with some guys that really they don't do a whole lot of other physical stuff besides jiu-jitsu and lifting. So they go into the gym, they feel great, and they can really push it. I got other guys that are law enforcement, military, firefighters. They might have done like a crazy call at the fire station the day before, so they're physically kind of taxed already going into that workout. I still want them to work up to an 8 out of 10 intensity, but just for that day. It probably isn't going to be a lifetime PR because they're kind of carrying some of that fatigue from what they were doing the day before with work, but we're still going to get in a solid training session. We're still going to get in a good workout, but we're managing fatigue by not prescribing them to have to hit a specific weight or to have to hit a specific percentage of their 1 rep max. We're basing it off of rate of perceived exertion. We're kind of basing it off of feel. Now, there's definitely some downsides to RPE. I'm not going to say that like RPE is the best thing ever because some people, for lack of a better term, are just soft and they don't want to push themselves. So, that's something that you got to figure out for yourself. If you are not seeing progress, if you're following a training program that has a lot of RPE kind of baked into it and you're not seeing results from that training program, first thing I would look at is, okay, what's your recovery look like? Are you training hard but failing to recover harder? If you're still making sure that your recovery is on point through sleep and nutrition and you're still not making progress, well, you just better train harder. You just better bring more intensity and just push yourself more on a lot of those RPE-based exercises. Don't, if it's RPE 8, it needs to be pretty damn hard. Don't, think like, oh, that felt kind of nice. It's like, no, it should work you pretty good. So that is fatigue management. It's important that whatever training program you follow, whether it's one of my training programs, your own training program, or you're working with another coach, as long as the training is specific to your training goals, specific to the physical demands of jiu-jitsu, and you have a good way of overloading your training from week to week, you also got to make sure you have that fatigue management aspect baked in there. All of those things kind of work together in the next principle number 4, which is the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. When we look at the SRA curve, you can almost think of it as baseline. If you're listening to this, you're going to have to, picture this in your head. If you're watching this, hopefully this, hand illustration makes sense. But your body is going to be at baseline, right? And when you do a hard workout, when you do a hard jiu-jitsu session, hard wrestling practice, I almost said wrestling practice. anyways, but you do something, right? You're either lifting heavy or you're rolling hard, whatever it is. That induces fatigue, and that is a training stimulus. So you'd end up dipping below baseline. Easy way to think about it is if you wanted to, lift the heaviest weight possible on deadlift, if you did 10 sets of deadlift the day before, you're probably not going to be ready to deadlift the heaviest weight ever because you're going to be pretty sore. You're going to be a little bit tight. You may systemically just feel kind of down because you just did a pretty hard workout the day before. And so when you do a hard workout or a hard jiu-jitsu session, you dip below baseline. Now that's the stimulus. When you then follow it up with the proper recovery, getting plenty of sleep, paying attention to your nutrition, that recovery process is going to allow your body to kind of come out of that dip and back up to baseline. As you come up back to baseline, your body's going to make what's called an adaptation. Basically, it means that your body receives a stimulus about, hey, we got to get stronger. So we're kind of banged up from the strength workout right now. We're going to recover, and then we're going to make ourselves even stronger so that way we're better prepared for the next time we have to lift something heavy. That is, like, at a very, very, very basic level, the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. And you got to respect that, because I'd say, like, another big mistake I see grapplers make is that they don't respect the SRA curve. They do stimulus, stimulus, stimulus. They don't do any recovery, and they make no adaptations. And in the example I gave earlier about the guy that's part of my training app, where he's doing 5 hours of jiu-jitsu Monday through Friday, doing an open mat on Saturday, and then on Sunday, that's like his one rest day. And then all throughout the week, he's like barely getting 6 hours of sleep. That's a whole lot of stimulus, not a whole lot of recovery, which means that there's probably not a whole lot of adaptation happening for that guy. And so in my response to him, I told him, like, look, man, like, you gotta respect the SRA curve. You gotta respect stimulus recovery adaptation process. So that needs to be baked into your training program, and you gotta have that kind of going in the back of your head. That's something that I try to work with all the athletes that I coach one-on-one. I really try to get them to understand that as fast as possible. Like, hey, these workouts may seem a little bit shorter, they may seem a little bit easier or less complex based on what you were doing before. And that's okay. What you're doing before was stimulus, stimulus, stimulus. And what we're doing now is we're still going to get a good training stimulus, but we're going to respect the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. You're going to get a training stimulus, dip a little bit below baseline, but not so much that you completely crash and burn. You're going to dip a little bit below baseline. You're going to follow the recovery protocols that I set you up with. You're going to get back to baseline, and your body's going to surpass baseline and make a crazy adaptation so you can get crazy strong, crazy jacked, get crazy good conditioning. That is principle number 4, the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. Now, number 5 is variation. Variation is really important because variation is what kind of continues to kickstart or continues to spin the wheel of that stimulus recovery adaptation curve. Variation is what brings in a new stimuli to your training program. Variation is also what can help with fatigue management. Variation is also what can help with progressive overload. And variation can come in a variety of different forms. Variation can mean changing different exercises. It can mean changing up the workout schedule as a whole. It can mean changing up the equipment that you use. It can mean changing up your like pre-workout nutrition or some of the nutritional strategies that you're using around your training sessions. The main reason why variation is so important is, yes, it, comes into effect to help you continue kind of working through the stimulus recovery adaptation curve, continue to progressively overload training, helps with fatigue management. But the biggest thing is that it really helps you avoid running into the law of accommodation. There are 2 kind of key concepts that we got to drive home here. You have adaptation, which is great. A+, amen for adaptation. And then you have accommodation. We want to stimulate positive adaptations in strength, building muscle, conditioning, all that stuff. What we don't want to happen is for our bodies to, for lack of a better term, kind of get complacent and kind of go into cruise control and just accommodate to the training that we're doing. We want to constantly strive to get better, constantly strive to get stronger. And variation is what keeps things fresh. Variation is what helps introduce a new stimulus to our body, so that way we can continue to spark strength gains, hypertrophy responses, improvements in conditioning, mobility, really whatever we're training for. Variation is what's going to help with that. And some of the ways that I like to implement variation into my training and the athletes that I coach is changing up equipment every so often, changing up exercises every so often, and even changing up workout structure. This is something that I've been doing and playing around with a lot for the past couple of years, because I think a lot of times athletes, and I'll speak for myself because I know I've done this before, we kind of find what we like and then we don't change it because we really, really like it. And then we end up accommodating to that style of training and we get kind of frustrated, like, man, why am I not building more muscle? Why am I not getting stronger? Why does my conditioning still suck? And sometimes we just need to get crazy and try something completely brand new, something that we've never done before, to introduce a lot more variation to kind of kickstart and stimulate some more positive progress. I'll talk about in a little bit with a case study of an athlete that I've been working with for the last 4 years on how we introduce some variation, but I'll save that for a little bit later in the podcast. And so let's go ahead and talk about the sixth and final principle of strength training that your training program needs if you want to get brutally strong, pack on slabs of muscle, and never gas out. And that is individualization. That's kind of a tough word to say, individualization. Your training program needs individualization. Everyone is different. Now, there's obviously very obvious commonalities between a lot of us, like our bodies, when we stimulate muscle growth through training close to failure from 5 to 30 reps, getting a crazy, crazy pump, working through a full range of motion, for the most part, that is going to work for just about everybody. Like, those things work. Like, we have the data to back that up. We have the science to back that up. But still, we all have individual differences. And I think the biggest problem, I keep saying that in every podcast episode, like, this is the biggest problem. This is the biggest problem. They can't all be the biggest problem. I'd say, let me rephrase that and say, this is just a really, really big problem. The big problem is that I see grapplers jump on these training programs, especially from athletes, not necessarily coaches. They jump on training programs from athletes that are kind of just stepping into the coaching realm. And they say, hey, like, it worked for this guy, I'm going to do what he does. And they forget that they're different people. They forget that just because that pro athlete only does bodybuilding workouts and that's what's worked great for them, you're not them. Like, not to make it funny, but you're not him, for lack of a better term. And we have to remember that what may work for someone else may not be what's going to work best for us. And it takes a little bit of trial and error, and it takes a little bit of kind of tinkering, if you will, with your training, tinkering with your strength and conditioning to kind of find what works best for you. And for myself, I've really recognized this over the last couple of years. I'm actually going through a process right now where I'm trying to, almost in a way, rebuild a lot of the training programs that I've had on my Strength Matrix training app. I'm in the process of rebuilding a lot of those to allow for a lot more individualization, where instead of you going through the training program and you have to follow it exactly how I did it, we have like the main principles, the main movement patterns, the main ideas, all kind of creating a scaffolding or the outline of the training program. But there's a lot more room for you to pick what's going to work best for you as an individual. For some people, doing a conventional deadlift feels awful. So it doesn't make sense to jump into a training program where conventional deadlift is the main lower body movement that you do. There may be some great principles like the max effort method, the dynamic effort method, that are used with the conventional deadlift, but that program isn't respecting that there are some individuals that don't prefer to do the conventional deadlift. Maybe they prefer to do the sumo deadlift. And so individualization is key. It's important that anytime you look at a new training program, whether it's from me, whether it's from a coach you're working with. If you're working with a coach one-on-one, they should be doing a good enough job to respect the fact that you're an individual, you're not some cookie cutter athlete like everyone else, and they should model your training program based around your individual needs. But if you're following one of my training programs or another training program online, just go into it with the mindset of like, hey, this is a guide. This is not a prescription. This is a strongly suggested guide for how I should train to get these results. However, there may be times where I need to take ownership of my own training and implement some changes for what's going to work best for me. And one of my favorite things, to be honest, is in the Strength Matrix training app on the community page. I love when people tell me they're following a training program and then they took it upon themselves to tweak something that worked a little bit better for them. I forget exactly what the exercise was in the Foundations program. I think it was might have been trap bar deadlift, or maybe it was Zercher box squat. Anyway, someone had said that they had a prior injury that made it really difficult for them to do a certain exercise. So they ended up doing I think it was trap bar deadlift. They ended up doing a sumo deadlift, or like a kettlebell deadlift, like a sumo kettlebell deadlift instead. And I think that's awesome. Like, I think that's great. And in their post on the community page, they said like, Coach, I hope this is okay. And I told them like, dog, that's freaking awesome. I want you to do that. Obviously, like, you know, these training programs are guides, and it's like a cooking or a baking recipe. If you follow the recipe but like sprinkle in a little of your own spices in there to make it more akin to what you prefer for the recipe, I think that's great. If you don't follow the recipe at all and try to get the same results, well, that's also going to be a problem. But all that to say, individualization is key. You got to respect it. Got to keep that in mind when you're following some of these other training programs. So those are the main 6 scientific principles of strength training that need to be baked into your grappling strength program. If your grappling strength program does not have specificity, it's not training that's specific to your training goals or the physical demands of jiu-jitsu, it's a bad training program. If your training program has no form of overload, it's not progressively getting harder from week to week, it's a bad training program. If your training program does not have some form of fatigue management or a way for you to dial up and dial back intensity based on how you're feeling from week to week, it's a bad training program. If your training program does not respect the SRA, or stimulus recovery adaptation curve, it's also a bad training program. If your training program has no variation and it does not include any sort of individualization, it's also probably not a very good training program. Those are the main 6 principles that you got to have in your workout program. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Hey, real quick, I wanted to pause the podcast and tell you about the Strength Matrix training app and our free training program called Grappler Accelerator. This is a complete training program that covers all of your needs to help you get started on becoming the best grappling athlete that you can be. Everything from a full strength and conditioning training program, a simple and clean diet guide, recovery protocols, a super sleep toolkit, and a bunch of other dope stuff to help you lift heavy and roll hard. There's already over 1,000 grapplers that have downloaded this training program and gotten started on enhancing their grappling athleticism, and you can be the next. To download this training program today, just go to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler or click the link in the description below. Now, back to the podcast. I did want to talk about a little bit on just some common mistakes and commonly misunderstood principles, and hopefully this can further help you out, further help you get brutally strong, pack on slabs of muscle, get crazy jacked, and never gas out. Now, I would say that some of the more common mistakes that I see grappling athletes make within these 6 principles is, and I kind of mentioned it before, is that they'll get a little too specific with their training. Remember, we don't want to get so specific in the gym that we're just mimicking all the stuff that we do on the mat. We want to be specific to the physical demands of our sport while also getting some of the benefit of just building general strength, building general work capacity, general conditioning, and building some muscle while we're at it. I'd also say that progressive overload doesn't need to be too crazy. I think sometimes when people kind of jump from not having any progressive overload to then just, throwing everything in the kitchen sink at progressive overload. And so usually for the way I coach athletes, especially newer athletes, is I just have one form of progressive overload per exercise, per workout, I guess. For example, like in a workout, it might be, okay, for your main movement, you're going to do 3 sets of 5. The next week, I just want you to add a little bit of weight on there. The week after that, I want you to add a little bit more weight. So we're just choosing one form of progressive overload for that exercise. We're not going to add weight and try to decrease rest periods. We're not going to try to add weight and increase time under tension. We're not going to try to add weight and increase sets. Just pick one form of progressive overload per exercise, per workout. So that was the main movement, 3 sets of 5, just trying to add weight each week. For maybe the accessory movements, we might do, hey, you're going to do 3 sets of 10 this week. Next week, it's 3 sets of 12. Week after that, 3 sets of 15. So you need progressive overload, but if you're new to implementing progressive overload, don't get too crazy. Just try to focus on one thing at a time. And you'll also find that the way you progressively overload training also needs to be specific to the physical demands of jiu-jitsu. One of my favorite ways to help build local muscular endurance and work capacity for grapplers is something called timed sets. So that may look like banded tricep pushdowns, banded curls, and dumbbell shrugs or something like that. And we may progressively overload that by increasing time. So, 3 sets of 60 seconds in week 1, 3 sets of 75 seconds in week 2, 3 sets of 90 seconds in week 3. And the reason why we're doing that is because we need to build some localized muscular endurance and work capacity for those muscle groups that they are commonly finding gets quickly burned out, either in training or in competition. We could take all the exact same movements and say, hey, I just want you to add weight every single week. But that isn't necessarily specific to what they need as an athlete. So we're kind of tackling, in this example, we're kind of tackling a few different things. We're tackling overload. We're also tackling specificity to their goal of not having their arms burn out when they're training. We're also tackling variation by making sure that individualization, by making it specific to their individual needs as an athlete. And so all that to say, progressive overload, don't get crazy with it. Make it specific to your training goal. Also make it specific to your individual needs as a grappler. Now, I talk about this pretty much every single episode, and that is you have to respect recovery. So you got to make sure you're implementing some form of fatigue management. You got to make sure you're implementing some form of some recovery protocols that are going to respect the SRA curve, or the stimulus recovery adaptation process. Because if you don't, honestly, I believe that almost any training program will work for something. It may not be the best training program ever, but it's probably going to work for something. However, the best training program in the world will never work if you're not recovering. So think of it in like 2 examples. On one hand, if you're recovering well, almost any training program will work for something. On the other hand, if you're not recovering well, it does not matter if you have the best coach, the best training program, like the most sophisticated periodization, mesocycle, block, phasic, whatever, it ain't gonna work if you're not recovering. Stimulate, don't annihilate, train hard, recover harder, and you're gonna be on a good path to getting brutally strong, getting jacked, and never gassing out. I did want to bring up one case study, or an athlete that I think has just really done a fantastic job of adhering to all these principles in his training. And that's my guy, Armando. Armando and I've been coaching Armando for 4 years now. Yeah, 4 years, which is absolutely crazy. And so Armando is one of my one-on-one grappling athletes. He is a police officer, or at the time he was a police officer. Now he was promoted to detective, which is freaking sick. He started as a purple belt, and now he's a brown belt. He's been a brown belt for a couple of years, so hopefully he's knocking on the door to black belt here. But when Armando first came to me, he was doing some workouts for jiu-jitsu, but he just wasn't seeing much progress. He was struggling with his conditioning. He was struggling with his strength. He had a bunch of different aches and pains. And then another thing that he was just struggling with just through the nature of his job, was a lot of fatigue. He was, doing night shifts as a police officer, trying to find time to train jujitsu, trying to find time to get to the gym and all that stuff. And so we started working together, and it makes me so fired up seeing his progress and just all the athleticism that he's been able to build. He's crazy, crazy strong for his body weight. He's built up his conditioning to a significant degree. Not only has he built athleticism specific to jiu-jitsu, but also for his career as a police officer. Some of the best stories I hear from him are like when he's on patrol and he has to get down with some action. He feels physically prepared for that, which I think is amazing. And the key, but I mean, the thing that really kind of led to those results was making sure that we respected and implemented all of these training principles into his training program. So when it comes to specificity, as his coach, I made sure like, okay, these are the specific goals that Armando has for jiu-jitsu. So we need to train in that direction. But he also has like physical demands of just being a police officer. So we have to make sure that we're addressing those as well. It can't be a training program that's all in on jiu-jitsu and doesn't take into account that he's also a police officer. He needs to be fast. He needs to be able to sprint. He needs to be strong. And he also just needs to be an all-around badass for his job as a police officer. So we had to make sure that specificity in his training was baked into that. What that looked like was, hey, we're still going to get crazy, crazy strong. We're still going to use the max effort method, dynamic effort method, repetition effort method. But we want to make sure that all of those workouts are going to have a low, quote unquote, wear and tear cost, because we don't want him to be crazy, crazy sore when he goes to work later and goes on patrol as a police officer. We also want to make sure that the workouts are going to still leave him with enough energy to train jiu-jitsu. So we were very specific in the exercises that we selected. So instead of doing like just a traditional powerlifter style back squat, we do a lot of belt squatting. Instead of doing traditional, just crazy 20 rep leg press sets for hypertrophy for the lower body, we mix in some cluster sets, some things that are going to be a little bit easier to recover from, but still stimulate some good hypertrophy. When it comes to overload, over the last 4 years, we've used pretty much every single form of overload that I mentioned in this podcast. So overload may look like increasing weight from week to week to week. Overload may be increasing reps. Overload may look like increasing time under tension, decreasing rest periods, making exercises or movements more and more complicated, increasing sets for that exercise from week to week to week. And Armando's responded great to all of those things. And we will change sometimes how we're overloading the training based on whatever season of life he's in, or based on whatever's going on with work. So if he's in like a big work push where it's like, hey, coach, for the next 4 to 6 months, work's just going to be freaking crazy, we need to make sure that those workouts are short and sweet. We can't always add more sets as our form of overload because it's going to take more time in the gym, and that's not what's going to work best for him. So we may just want to just increase reps per set, or just increase weight, or decrease rest periods with the same number of reps, same number of sets with the same weight. And so we use overload strategically to make sure that it fits within whatever the season of life is that he's in. When it comes to fatigue management, this is huge for Armando and then the other law enforcement, firefighters, and military that I've worked with. Fatigue management quickly becomes one of the most important principles that we have to respect, mainly because there's going to be things that they do as part of their job that are going to induce a lot more fatigue than a guy that just hangs out at the gym all day and goes to jiu-jitsu. And so there are definitely days where, Armando may have come off of a evening patrol, didn't get much sleep. Maybe he had to stay at work late to tackle some other stuff, and he has a little bit more fatigue going into the prescribed workout on the calendar or on the spreadsheet. And so I have to make sure as his coach that fatigue management is built in there, where it's like, hey, you're going to work up to a 5-rep max for the day. It doesn't need to be a lifetime PR. It doesn't need to be like the heaviest, gut-busting, most intense set you've ever done in your entire life. But I want you to work up to something heavy for 5 reps today. And based on the fatigue that he's kind of carrying into that workout, he can kind of manage how hard he needs to go for that day, so that way he doesn't like run himself into the dirt. And Armando's done an excellent job of doing that. One of the coolest things about working with him for so long is that now we've kind of built this awesome coach athlete relationship where I kind of give him like a guideline for the workouts, and then he's very in tune with his body of knowing like, okay, I feel pretty good today. It says only do 4 sets, but I'm feeling freaking great. So I'm going to crank it up and I'm going to do a few more sets, or I'm going to go a little bit heavier on this because I want to strike when the iron's hot. Or it may say do 8 sets of 3 for a given workout, but I'm feeling pretty banged up. So I'm actually going to move that particular exercise to another day when I feel fresh, because I want to hit it hard, and I'm just going to do some sled work or something with a little bit lower intensity today. Armando's done a great job of doing that. Then when it comes to the stimulus recovery adaptation curve, we also make sure that we're stimulating positive progress, we're stimulating strength, we're stimulating hypertrophy, stimulating conditioning, but we've done a ton of work over the last 4 years to get his recovery protocols on lock. He sent me a text message the other day that got me super fired up. We started implementing some, in kind of like addition to the sleep, addition to the nutrition and supplementation, we started implementing some breath work and some habits around sunlight. And maybe I'll do a full episode on breath work and sunlight in the future. But long story short, we were able to see like, man, like Armando's recovery is freaking killing it right now. It's great. He's able to get in a really solid workout, really solid jiu-jitsu session. And through those extra habits that we kind of baked into his daily schedule, he's able to successfully recover from that. And remember, it's not about what you do in the gym or on the mat that leads to progress. It's about what you do and can still recover from. So if we can get an awesome workout and recover from that, that's where we're going to make progress. And so that's freaking awesome. And then the next one, variation. We include a ton of variation in Armando's training program, and it's been fun over the last 4 years to kind of look back at all the different workouts that he's done and see like, man, like he's done a ton of different stuff. Like he's done different phases of training that look a little bit more like traditional powerlifting when that was a good season of life to train that way. We've also done some stuff that looks a lot like bodybuilding. We've done like some hybrid approaches where it's like power building while also mixing in some athletic drills and things like that to keep him explosive. And so we are constantly varying training every so often to make sure that we're still stimulating progress. We're still kind of sparking positive growth and positive strength gains, hypertrophy, conditioning, all of that good stuff. And then lastly, individualization. This is where I feel like having a coach that you can work with one-on-one really provides the greatest value, because I can build like a training program for Armando that, you know, pulls from all these different influences from things I've learned from like guys like Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell, Phil DeRue, Mark Bell, all these different influences that I've learned from. I can take all the best stuff that I've learned and tweak it individually for someone like Armando, where it's going to work well for him, his body type, his work schedule, his training schedule, his strengths, athletic weaknesses that we're going to bring up, strengths that we want to make even stronger, and all that good stuff. And so I'm super proud of Armando. He's absolutely crushing it right now with his training. And it's pretty cool as a coach. Some of you who are listening to this, maybe you guys are coaches too. And if you are, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes you get more fired up for your athlete's success more than your own. And for me, like, there might be a day where I hit a PR in the gym. I'm pretty fired up about it. But if later that day Armando texts me saying that he hits a PR or he like had some huge breakthrough in his training, I get even more fired up than I was a couple hours earlier at the gym hitting my own PR. And so, Armando, if you're listening to this, congratulations, dog. You're crushing it right now. And you're just a prime example of someone that's respected all of these principles of training. And I think the results speak for themselves based on all your hard work. So great job. Now let's go ahead and move on to some weekly shout outs from the Lift Heavy, Roll Hard Grappling Club. This first question came from George Harrison, which I think is just perfect for this episode. He says, great video. When programming, do you only do one max effort set each session for the upper and lower body, depending on the session each week, adding weight to that set? Or do you program fixed sets, like 3 sets of 3, 5 sets of 5 with RPE progressions each week? Essentially, how would you program progressions with the condensed conjugate system? This is a fantastic question and kind of directly applies to what we were talking about earlier with this idea of progressive overload or the principle of overload. Now, when it comes to true max effort work, like if you want to do max effort training that is like written in the Westside Barbell Book of Methods, and what's the scientific strength training or whatever that book is by Yuri Verkhoshansky, that type of max effort training needs to be done where you work up to an all-out heaviest set you could possibly do for 1 to 3 and sometimes even 5 reps to have it be technically true max effort work. However, that may not always be practical and that may not always meet the specificity demand of what we're training for. But in my mind, I always put in some form of max effort or max effort adjacent training. So for some athletes, like I'm working with a master's athlete right now, Bill, great guy. He's a blue belt. We're getting him ready for Master Worlds. I don't need Bill to do a 1 rep max box squat. like that's not just going to work for him. Not that he can't do it, but that just wouldn't be like the most appropriate thing for his training goals, especially with his age and stuff like that. However, we're still going to do some heavy squats. It may not be an all-out 1 rep max where the bar is loaded on his back, but we may do some goblet squats that are pretty heavy. We may do some like single leg Bulgarian split squats that are pretty heavy. And in that context, yeah, we will progress the RPE for, say, 3 sets of 5, or we may try to add weight to those 3 sets of 5 week after week after week. For other athletes, it is like more traditional max effort work where really we are working up to a 1 rep, a 3 rep, or a 5 rep max, and we're really just working up to that max for the day. So true max effort work, yes, you are working up to a max. If you want to think of it as like max effort adjacent or heavy efforts, if you will, for 3 sets of 3 or 5 sets of 5, you can progress those in a variety of ways. You can progress those with weight on the bar or weight or load being used. You can progress by adding reps to the set. You can progress by adding number of sets per workout. And if you've watched my video on the max effort method, you'll see that the max effort main movement is typically the movement that we bring up to that one top set, that one all-out set at the start of the workout. So say we're doing Zercher box squat, we're going to be working up, starting with an empty bar, working all the way up until we hit a 1, 3, or a 5 rep max, depending on what the training program calls for. There's times where it's better to work up to 5 rep maxes at different parts of your training season compared to 1 rep maxes and vice versa. So that's going to be for the max effort main movement. And then the max effort secondary movement is a little bit more on that side of like max effort adjacent or heavy efforts where we're doing 3 sets of 3, 3 sets of 5 for those max effort secondary movements. So I go way deep in the max effort method in that YouTube video, so definitely check that out. But when it comes to how would you program progressions with the condensed conjugate system, we could really use all those overload methods within condensed conjugate. So if you're doing condensed conjugate where it's max effort lower, dynamic effort upper for one workout, the next workout being max effort upper, dynamic effort lower, and then that third workout being repetition effort or like a jacked and tan day, you could implement every single form of progressive overload in that. You can add weight each week to given secondary movements and accessory exercises. You can add reps per set. So maybe on some of your accessory exercises on like on pull-ups, you do 3 sets of 10 one week, and then next week you do 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 15. You could take the exact same exercises like pull-ups and progressively overload it by getting closer and closer to failure. So do a set to 2 reps in reserve. Next week, you're going to do a set to 1 rep in reserve. Week after that, you're going to do an all-out AMRAP or as many reps as possible. You can decrease rest periods between sets. You can make exercises more and more complicated. So maybe you start with a box squat, then you progress to something like a belt squat where you can use your hands to kind of help you balance a little bit. And then week 3, you do a free squat, or not a box squat, not a belt squat, but like a front squat, high bar back squat, specialty bar squat, whatever you're doing. There's so many different ways so you can progress and overload your training. And so my hope is with this episode, George, is that when you hear the breakdown of all the different types of overload, you can see where you can start to plug those in to your training program. And if you have follow-up questions, please leave the questions in the comments. I try to answer every question in the comment section that I can. And that goes for anyone else who's in the Lift Heavy Roll Hard Grappling Club. Next shout out, we got Luke the Monkey. Hope he's got out of that barrel, if you know what I'm saying. His question is, if you do a deadlift as your main leg day exercise and build up strength in that for 3 weeks, and then you switch to a squat as your main exercise for 3 weeks, won't you lose part of the deadlift strength you built up when you're not deadlifting for 3 weeks straight? This is fantastic because this question kind of ties in with the idea of specificity. So if you're a power lifter, and not only do you want to build strength from doing deadlifts, but you're also wanting to maximize your skill progression in the deadlift, it's probably not a good idea to take 3 weeks off of deadlifting. However, if you're a grappling athlete, you're really just doing the deadlift as like you're using the deadlift as a proxy exercise, so to speak, to build lower body strength. And so we can build lower body strength and kind of hang on to those strength adaptations. You're really not going to see much significant, if any, decrease in strength adaptations in the lower body from not deadlifting for 3 weeks, as long as you're doing other lower body exercise within those 3 weeks that you're not deadlifting. Now, I do think it is important, even as grappling athletes, to build the skills of just lifting well. So as a grappling athlete, you don't necessarily need to dedicate the same level of focus and intensity to your squat form and technique as like a powerlifter would, or the deadlift as a powerlifter would. But you should be striving to do the exercises well. You should be striving to make them look clean, make them look technically proficient. And so I do think it's a good idea to kind of keep I think they call it greasing the groove, or keep the gears oiled, one of those phrases. I think it's important to kind of keep that skill sharp, if you will. So what I like to do is I like to squat and deadlift every single week. I bench press or horizontal press and overhead press every single week. So whatever, and I do vertical pulling and horizontal pulling every single week, but I just tweak it depending on what week of training I'm in, and I add a lot of variation to kind of change it up. So if I'm running a phase of training, a 3-week wave, where I'm using a squat pattern for my max effort main movement, for my dynamic effort movements, I'm going to use deadlift style movements. If I'm doing deadlift for max effort work, then I'm going to follow it up with squat patterns for the dynamic effort portion of the workout. So that way, every single week, I'm still getting exposed to those movement patterns, but I'm not always hitting those movement patterns heavy for max effort work every single week. So Luke, I hope that answers your question. Next question is from Paul, or actually it's not a question. He just left a comment on a video of me dogging on the Turkish getup, which I think is funny. It's funny to like make fun of the Turkish getup, and then all these people come out of the woodwork and like they're always quick to run to the Turkish getup's defense. Anyway, I thought this comment was fun. He said, I totally disagree, and here's why. I was learning the stiff arm side control escape from bottom when an opponent moves his arm. I was getting 50% of the escape, but couldn't get it at all. After doing Turkish get-ups, I started hitting this escape much easier, helped my weak points in my body. This is the perfect BJJ strength move. So sorry, but your video is BS. And that's totally fine. Like, as much as I like to dog and hate on the Turkish getup, because I still think it's a stupid exercise for making you brutally strong as a grappling athlete, there are some people that still really like it, and that is totally okay. I know for me, like, someone may look at my training and say, that's not optimal, that's not functional, you're gonna, blow your back out, you're gonna be in a wheelchair when you get older because you're doing exercises that are not, properly aligned these primal movement patterns. And guess what? Like, I just love lifting. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And if someone likes to do the Turkish getup and in their situation, they got benefit from that, I can't really argue with that. I think that's incredible. And if that's what you found to help you get better at the stiff arm side control escape, that's fantastic. And I think that's awesome. I think it's really important to remember about that principle of individualization. I think I've been coaching. How long have I been coaching? I started coaching in 2017, or that's when I started my business. So I might have been coaching a little bit before that, but I wouldn't really count that. I would say I've been coaching officially since 2017. And I've been studying strength and conditioning pretty deeply for a lot longer before I started coaching. And over the years, I have found that almost everything works to some extent and that there's always exceptions to the rule. Even if there is some scientific study that comes out and says that you can only build muscle by performing 5 to 30 reps, I guarantee that there is a bodybuilder somewhere out there that exclusively did sets of 50 and got crazy, crazy jacked. And there's also a bodybuilder that probably only did 1 to 4 reps and got crazy, crazy jacked. And at that point, it's like, well, what are we going to do about that? Like, we have all these conflicting messages. One person over here thinks that barbell movements is like going to destroy your back, and it's like the least functional thing you can do, and you have to do these patterns of all this other, swinging a stick and all that stuff. You have other people, on the other hand, that say that if just because they squat 800 pounds, they have all the strength they would need for jiu-jitsu. It's like, well, who am I to argue with either of those people? I know what works best for me. I've tried a lot of different things. I really like the training that I've tried, and I've gotten a lot of value out of it, and I'm using it to help the athletes that I work with. And I've just kind of realized at the end of the day, like, you know what? If there's an exercise that I think is dumb, like the Turkish getup, I already know that there's someone out there that does it and actually got a lot of value from it. And I can't knock them for that. So I think that's great. So Paul, more power to you, dog. If you're doing Turkish get-ups all day and you are getting brutally strong and you're getting crazy jacked, like, keep doing what you're doing, man. I'm happy for you. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. Share this episode with your favorite training partners. If you're lifting heavy and you're rolling hard, if you're starting your own crew of people that you're training with, which kind of gets me thinking, I should do an episode all about the importance of training partners, because that would be like, this is what it's all about, is finding good training partners where you could, crank up that Tupac, crank up that Metallica and Parkway Drive, throw some heavy ass weight around, roll hard, have a good time. That's what it's all about. We're here to lift heavy, roll hard, and have a good time. So share this episode with your favorite training partners. If you like what you heard in this episode and you want to see all of these principles put into practice, I have a 100% free training program called Grappler Accelerator that's going to help you kickstart your grappling athleticism. You're going to get started on building a base of strength, stimulating some muscle growth, and enhancing your conditioning. You can get it completely for free, thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler, or just click the link in the description below. Lift heavy, roll hard, catch y'all later. Peace.